Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast, where we talk all things faith and sexuality. It's really great to have you with us today. We're so thrilled that you're listening as we continue our Meet the Authors series, where we're just taking the chance to get to know some of the people who've written for us on our website, livingout.org, and to learn from them and about them. And today I'm really excited because we've got someone with us today who I have learned a lot from, and I'm really excited that you're going to get to learn from her, hear some of her wisdom as well. But before I introduce our guest, I'll introduce Anne. I'm so pleased that Anne is with me. And this podcast today is going to release exactly 1 month before Christmas. So I was thinking, what are you most looking forward to about Christmas this year?
Well, I mean, I'm not a massive fan of Christmas, I have to say. I don't like all the sort of tat and tinsel and glitter that gets everywhere, and and I can't wrap a present to save my life. But I think this year I'm really excited because my parents and my sister and my niece are all coming to us over Christmas. Nice. So it's gonna, we've got some games for them to play. Abby, my housemate, has gone crazy with getting everyone a stocking, including the cat. We've got quite a Christmassy house, so we've got a log fire and stuff. So I think just spending time with family, eating nice food and playing games and, petting the cat. That's
so nice. What's your Christmas game of choice?
Well, we all love charades, so yeah.
Classic. Yeah. What's Christmas about charades?
Exactly, yeah.
Very nice.
How about you?
Well, it probably won't surprise listeners that tat and tinsel and glitter do appeal to me. So that's one thing I like about Christmas, I guess. I always think about it. I mean, all the obvious things. It is obviously lovely to have time with family and friends. I do like the food, I'll admit. This week, we've had some cold roast chicken and sausages in the fridge, which I've been picking out every time I open the fridge. And it's reminded me of Christmas. I think I most like about Christmas the leftovers, actually, the turkey, the gammon and stuff that you can just pick away at from the fridge. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Turkey sandwiches, one of my favourites. So definitely the food, something I'm looking forward to. It's not long, we've got to get ready, we're 4 weeks away. Well, let me introduce today's guest. I'm really thrilled that today we've got a friend of mine, Julie Maxwell, with us. Welcome to the podcast, Julie. And why not just start off by telling us a few key details about yourself?
Yeah, hi. Good to be with you this afternoon. I'm a paediatrician, a community paediatrician, which means I work with children with learning difficulties and autism and language disorders. And I have 3 children. I've got a 17-year-old, a 19-year-old and a 21-year-old. And they're all at home with me and my husband at the moment. Two of them come back from university. That's about me.
Very nice. And so what are you most looking forward to about Christmas this year?
Well, do you know what? I'm with Anne. I am not a big fan of Christmas. I hate all the decorations and all the tat and all the I'm not a big fan of Christmas. But do you know what I'm really looking forward to this year? I'm really looking forward to being able to do services at church without any restrictions, because we were still last year under quite a few sort of restrictions as to what we could and couldn't do. So I'm just really looking forward to have normal services and being able to hug people. And hugging's an interesting one. I wasn't really into hugging massively before COVID, and now I want to hug everybody.
How lovely. It would be a hug-filled Christmas. I love that idea.
So, Julie, you mentioned that you're a community paediatrician, which it sounds like you have to get really long business cards to fit that on. Could you tell me a bit more? What does that look like day to day? What do you sort of spend your time doing?
There's a lot of paperwork involved, a lot of report writing, which is the boring bit. But the best bit about my job is doing developmental assessments on children. So generally younger children, sort of around 3-4 years old, looking at their general development, their language development, and kind of looking at what their issues are and how we can best help them. So it involves a lot of talking to the parents, a lot of supporting parents, a lot of kind of liaising with schools, preschools, other professionals. I love all that kind of stuff. And I also do looked after children. So that's children who are in foster care. So I'm involved in sort of approving foster carers. That's what I was doing this morning, actually, and also doing assessments on children who are in care to make sure that they're healthy, because they're quite at risk of having generally poor health and poor outcomes. So it's a very varied job, but I don't deal with unwell, sick children. It's more about development.
Amazing. Yeah, it sounds like no 2 days are the same for you, really.
No, not really.
And how did you get into it? Is this something you'd always wanted to do, or is it something you kind of, approached at a particular point in your life?
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to work with children. At one point I thought I wanted to do neonatology, which is kind of special care baby unit, but premature babies. I really loved that, but when I had my own kids, I realised that that kind of medicine wasn't really compatible with being able to put my family first. So I work I've only ever worked part-time since I had the kids, and the community paediatrics is something which is flexible. It's basically 9 to 5. I can kind of move things around as and when I need to. So yeah, and I do enjoy it.
Excellent. That's the main thing, isn't it? So, Julie, you mentioned that a lot of the kids that you work with in your professional life are kind of younger children, but you've got your own older children, teenagers, and I believe you work with youth as well, kind of teens.
Yeah, so I've been involved in youth work in kind of a variety of ways. Well, ever since I was a teenager myself, probably, I guess, but had a bit of a break while my kids were growing up, and sort of did the whole toddler group, thing. But about 10 years ago, I started working with the 11 to 14s at our church. I go to a large Anglican church. We have a very large youth section. And so I've been working with the 11 to 14s over the last 10 years. So that kind of gives me another perspective, as well as my own children, and as well as my sort of paediatric perspective. I love working with young people. I love chatting with young people. I love trying to understand young people. I don't think they always like me, and in that I'm not cool, I'm not young, but I can be a mother figure, I think, sometimes, which I think can be good in youth work. I think a variety of ages in youth work is really helpful.
Yeah, and it's definitely good to not to try and be too cool when I've made that mistake and I'm like, I'm a middle-aged woman. Stop it. Yeah. And there are lots of strings to your bow. You also work for an organisation called Lovewise. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what you do there? Yeah, so I discovered Lovewise about 12 years ago, something like that, when I became a bit concerned about what my kids were going to learn in sex education at school, both from a Christian perspective, but also from a paediatric perspective. I was concerned about the sort of what was in the material they were learning about. So I researched and came across Lovewise and used some of their material to teach my daughter and some of her friends, and then ended up working for them. So it's basically a Christian organisation. We produce resources which kind of teach on various aspects of marriage, growing up, puberty, babies, abortion, pornography, all of those kind of topics from a Christian perspective. Some of the things are more Christian than others. So some of them we go into schools and teach. So sometimes it might be Christian schools, other times it might be just ordinary schools. There are also books for parents, resources for churches, and the charity was set up by 2 paediatricians. So that's kind of, I guess we're all coming from a very similar perspective. I really enjoy doing that as well. Wow, it sounds like something that's really, really needed. What are the kind of topics that are most in demand, I suppose? What do parents and teachers and kind of people who support young people particularly want to know? I think pornography is one of the big ones. Particularly schools, are really concerned, and some of the material that's out there is actually quite explicit in itself, whereas ours is very much not. And I think parents, I think, obviously gender is, I think is one of the biggest concerns for parents at the moment. So we have a number of articles on our website, which is actually for young people, called Lovewise Online, and we've got a number of articles on issues on there. Yeah, no, we're going to sort of come on to talking about trans because, you've written some really helpful stuff for us and obviously you've worked quite closely with Andrea on some stuff for parents as well. How did you actually sort of get involved, particularly in the conversation about trans-identifying teens? Can you sort of walk us through that journey a little bit?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think from a combination of the Lovewise stuff, and so teaching kids about puberty and about relationships, combination of that and my paediatric hat, I just kind of became quite concerned about what I discovered was going on with young people, and just thought, hang on, this doesn't really add up, and I don't think kids are getting the right kind of support really, and so as I discovered what was going on from a Lovewise and a paediatric perspective, I kind of well, quite a lot of people talk about going down a rabbit hole. You sort of I think it's one of those things that once you get interested in it, you just get more and more and more interested in it. I just want to help people, help families, help young people, there don't seem to be that many people willing to kind of get involved in this area, and so I did.
So do you work with sort of secular bodies and organisations as well as Christian stuff? Are you able to sort of bridge that gap a little bit?
Yeah, so I am, and I think it was actually in the secular world really that I first got really involved in this. So I wrote a letter which got published along with Chris Richards from Lovewise, and that got the notice of some of the secular clinicians that were involved in this. So yes, I'm involved in a whole group of clinicians that are sort of trying to kind of raise questions and raise awareness on this whole issue. So I think in many ways the Christian world, in like so many other things, we're a bit behind the curve on this one, I think we're trying to catch up a little bit.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. It's really interesting to know a bit more about your professional background and all the different areas that you're working with young people and children. I'd see your passion for helping and supporting them as well. After the break, we'll be diving into something that you've written for the Living Out website, which has been extremely helpful. Hi listeners, Anne here, just letting you know about our new YouTube channel. We've got loads of stuff for your viewing pleasure, including personal stories, talks, animations, advice, and these podcasts, with lots of content being added all the time. Click the icon on the Living Out website or go to YouTube and search @LivingOut to view and subscribe.
So Julie, you've written a really helpful and important article for us under the title Parenting a Child Questioning Their Gender Identity. I wonder first, just maybe for any listeners who might not be so sure even what that means, could you just talk and help us understand what we're talking about when we talk about a child questioning their gender identity?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting phrase, isn't it? And I think lots of people are very aware of the phrase transgender, but there are good reasons why we don't necessarily want to kind of use that immediately with young people, or even at all perhaps with young people. So I think for particularly people who've got teenagers themselves, I think most of us are aware that amongst teenagers and young people there is a real question over people's identity generally, and I'm hearing increasing numbers of stories of schools and things kind of asking people what their gender identity is, or asking them what their pronouns are, and it almost seems to be who are you, what's your gender identity, what pronouns do you want to use, and I think to a certain extent that is increasing the likelihood that young people are questioning their gender. So rather than just the sort of general who am I as a teenager, they're instinctively, what's my gender identity? Am I male? Am I female? Am I non-binary? And actually you can see lists of kind of hundreds or however many different gender identities. And so I think it's leading a huge number of young people to be thinking about something that when I was young, it wasn't even something you thought about. So I think, this whole idea of questioning your gender identity. So there are lots of young people who aren't necessarily identifying as transgender even, but they have got questions around what is my gender identity, who am I.
I guess that's one of the important points, isn't it? There's a huge breadth of experiences actually that fall under this whole area of transgender, gender questioning. And actually, maybe that's even helpful to point out to people actually that it's not a one size fits all. It's not only if someone's saying, no, I'm definitely trans, I want to do this, that and the other to my body. Actually, no, it can be all at different levels of kind of questioning and exploring that. And I mean, you mentioned there, and many listeners will be aware of, there's a huge numbers of young people who seem now to be questioning their gender identity or identifying as trans, which is a relatively new thing in kind of the last decade, has grown after the last decade. You've indicated there it's very much more in the kind of waters young people are swimming in. But could you say a bit more on why you think this is happening? Why so many young people are questioning their gender in a way that hasn't been evident before? How you might kind of understand what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I think, we definitely know that there are statistics around the massive increase in particularly teenage girls who have been referred for gender identity services. But there are also a whole raft of young people who haven't been referred to medical services that, questioning their gender as well. And I think there are a lot of reasons that people are kind of suggesting as to why this might be. Obviously, some people will say, well, it's just because there's greater awareness and there's more understanding. I think the majority of people don't kind of think that is a sensible answer, really, because, if there were so many teenage girls that genuinely had a gender issue, we would also be seeing a whole raft of middle-aged women with gender issues. And actually, what we're more likely to see is middle-aged women who say, oh my goodness, I wanted to be a boy when I was younger. And actually, if I lived now, then maybe I would have said I was transgender, which is what we seem more likely to see. So you just see this kind of peak in the teenage years. So to me, that suggests there's something else going on. So there... Partly, I think, as I already mentioned, this idea of children in schools being asked what their gender identity is. So they're having to think about it when it's something that previously they wouldn't have thought about. They wouldn't have even questioned it. They may not have liked particularly who they were, but they wouldn't have even occurred to them they could identify as something different. But one of the biggest issues is kind of what we call social contagion. So we know... historically, so kind of, when I was doing paediatrics, 10, 20 years ago, we would see big sort of clusters of teenage girls who would be anorexic or self-harm, and there would often be a whole group of friends who would kind of end up with very similar things. And we're seeing a similar thing with this whole gender identity difficulty. And there seems to be something about... Once one girl identifies as non-binary or a boy, then others seem to follow suit, and it seems to be that they kind of join in. We're also seeing a significant increase in mental health problems generally, which is kind of quite known about on the media. And most of these young people who express issues around their gender identity, a lot of them have already had mental health problems previously, and this comes kind of as part of or on top of those mental health problems. And a significant number of them are also on the autistic spectrum as well. Some already diagnosed, some end up with a diagnosis later. So there's sort of all sorts of things that can be going on with these young people, but it seems that in our current climate, in our current society, the distress that these young people are feeling around all sorts of things seems to be interpreted as gender identity, that they kind of get given this as a potential answer, and that can be through social media, influencers, YouTubers, who tell them this is your problem, and this is what's going to fix it, that transitioning is going to fix your problem. And obviously, we know, well, all of us, if somebody says this is the answer to your problem, and you're distressed, you jump at it if it seems like it's going to answer your problem. So I think, it is very complex, and nobody totally knows, because this is such a new phenomenon, this huge increase. Nobody really knows for sure, but those are the kind of things that seem to be playing into it, and that seem to be issues that are causing problems.
It's really helpful, isn't it? It is complex, but actually it's important to have a depth of appreciation of what's going on, not just the kind of soundbite statistics we might hear in the news, say, but actually think what are all the many different facets of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so the article you've helpfully written for us is kind of, I guess, speaking to parents who might find themselves in some way engaging with the young person engaged in these kind of questions. Maybe that age a child has suddenly announced that they're trans, or they want to change the way they're dressing or change their pronouns, or in some way just is expressing some questions around their gender. And you kind of really are seeking just to bring some initial reassurance maybe to parents and some kind of top key tips, bits of advice. I think you've kind of got 12 top tips in there. I wonder if you could pick out just a few that you think are maybe most significant, or just kind of what are the most important things you always feel you want to communicate to a parent who's facing that kind of situation.
Yeah, I think the number one thing really, or the biggest thing has got to be not to panic, because I think, you know, parenting teenagers is hard work generally. It's a whole different ball game, and I don't think anyone prepares you for parenting teenagers. And I think, you know, we're having to handle things all of the time, but I think this particular issue, I think because young people are totally immersed in it, whereas as parents we're often not. So I think it tends to come as a huge shock to parents, and I think a lot of the parents I've spoken to have just gone into a complete and utter panic mode. So I think, you know, one of the big reasons for writing this article was to give parents somewhere to go that they could just kind of go, okay, I don't need to panic. These are some of the things that I can do. So you know, there is, because you just want to do something as a parent, and what you don't want to do is react in a way that is going to make this worse. So I think that the next thing I would say after don't panic is to listen to what they say. And I think as parents we can be sometimes too quick to tell our kids what we think, to try and tell them what they should do, and there is a place for that, but I think we need to actually hear what they have to say. We need to hear what is they're trying to communicate, what might be behind their request to dress differently or to have a different name or whatever. We don't have to accede to their request, but we need to listen to why they want it and actually give them that sort of empathy and sympathy along, so that to help them know that we care about them, even if we're not going to agree with what they're saying. So I think that would be the second big thing, would be really listening. And the third thing is getting information, because I think, like we've already said, you know, I think it's something that parents don't really understand. Their young person will have probably done masses of research on this, spent hours on YouTube or wherever it might be, been to the LGBT club at school or whatever it is. And as parents, we need to do our research so that we're armed with information, good information, in order to start to understand and to listen, and to kind of navigate a way through that. I think parenting teenagers is a lot about navigating various different issues and navigating the changes that happen in the relationships, and this is no exception, but it is trickier in some ways.
That's so helpful. And we'll come back and make sure we talk at the end about kind of where people can access more information, more support and stuff. I'm just struck with you talk there about not panicking and listening, and even actually in the research, is part of it is patience, isn't it? I think I've to learn that in life, just walking through difficult things going in my friend's life or in pastoral situations of, I'm a bit of a problem solver and I want to be able to just solve it really quickly, get it all done. And most things in life actually revolve patience, and it is a walking alongside people on a journey. I guess that's a summary of part of what you're saying there for parents. You mentioned earlier many young people who question their gender identity have various different things going on, maybe already experiencing some level of mental health difficulties, sometimes autistic diagnosis or characteristics and stuff, different things. Any advice for parents if they are aware of or think there might be other factors going on, of kind of what do they do if that's their perception of the situation, and how can't they make wise decisions in those contexts? Yeah,
I think if they... I mean, a lot of these parents will already know that there might be mental health problems going on, so they might already be seeking some kind of counselling or some kind of support. So it may be that if they are worried that perhaps their child is on the autistic spectrum, they might need to look into getting a diagnosis. I think one of the tricky things about this is that currently a lot of people who might be in counselling or therapy or those kind of things don't want to go near kids who have issues with gender, and so often the only people who are willing to work with these kind of children are people who have a particular agenda, and who are going to totally encourage them in one particular way. So I think one bit of advice for parents would be to tread carefully, to try and have some really open conversations with their GP, or with their therapist or whoever it is they're dealing with, to make sure that they've got somebody who is going to fully explore the issues and not just focus on the gender, because the gender might be the presenting issue, but actually we need to look at all of the other things underneath that. And I mean, there is a NHS England review which has recently taken place called the CAS review, and there have been some reports out from that which are trying to make sure that the NHS is putting more effort into a full psychological assessment and therapy and looking at some of these other issues rather than just picking on the gender, and heading off down a route which may not be the right route for that child.
Yeah, I've skimmed that report that came out a month ago, I guess now. It is very much putting across the perspective you're saying. If there's all these different factors seem to be at play, and they're the place for us to start by helping young people.
Yeah.
And I think that's encouraging, actually. There seem to be some shifts towards what seems to be quite level-headed thinking based on what you're saying of the evidence we do have of what seems to be happening. And you mentioned that a key tip for parents is to kind of do some research, get some understanding themselves. Maybe give us a few top recommendations of resources people can turn to, or kind of organisations people might want to turn to for support if they're parents in those situations.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as far as the situation goes with children at the moment, there isn't very much out there Christian literature wise for kind of reading material, but I think there is quite a lot of secular reading material that is very helpful. So there's lots of books which I think some of them we've mentioned in the article. There's a particularly good book called Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier, which I think is a really helpful book, particularly if you've got a teenage girl struggling. There are there's a series of podcasts called Gender: A Wider Lens, which is a really interesting kind of weekly podcast which looks at all kinds of different issues. Some of them from a perspective that we wouldn't look at it from, but it's interesting to kind of hear that perspective. There is a support group for parents of children who are questioning their gender, called the Bayswater Support Group, and that is a group which is really helpful, because I think one of the other things that's really important for parents is to connect with other parents going through the same thing, because I think particularly Christian parents probably think they're the only ones going through this, when actually we know that there are lots of Christian parents going through these kind of issues. And so I think connecting with other parents is a really important thing, and understanding that you're not alone, and sharing tips of how you've got through things. So one of the big rules of parenting is actually parenting together and sharing things in any area of parenting. But I think this particularly, and that's where I guess online stuff has been really helpful, because it's meant we're able to connect with people all over the country in a way that perhaps pre-COVID we didn't quite so much.
That's great. We'll make sure we put links to those various resources and groups in the show notes. And also, listeners, do take a look at the article, because there's lots of resources linked at the bottom as well to point there. And my encouragement to anyone listening would be to go and read the article. It is so helpful. Some real practical wisdom there. Go if you're a parent, you might be in this situation, it'll help. You might not be, but actually it's just good to be aware of what's going on among kind of teenage youth culture and be a bit prepared. But even actually if you're not a parent, I think it's a helpful thing to read, just to understand what's going on and how you might support friends who are parents or people in your church, and just kind of be aware of this. I really want to believe that we as the church are well positioned to be part of the answer actually to some of the difficulties that teenagers are experiencing. So do go and have a look at that brilliant article from Julie. We are out of time for today, sadly. I'm so aware we've just scratched the surface of a huge topic. The topic of gender, transgender is huge. If you want to explore that further, do head to livingout.org. Just type transgender into the search bar at the top. You'll find a whole range of different resources we've got, which are aimed to help us to think through these different experiences people have and what the Bible says about that, what faithfulness to Jesus looks like. Big thank you to Julie for joining us today, for sharing with us much of your wisdom. Thank you for Anne as well for being with us. And thank you to you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and also to share this episode. Maybe you know a parent you think this would be really good for. Why not send it to them in a message? Encourage them to have a listen. We'll be back in a few weeks' time. We'll be interviewing another of our authors then, and we hope that you can join us for that episode.